Hello everyone. Today we are having a conversation with Yuji about his professional journey. He is someone who calls himself a scientist and is of a scientific blend and has insight into the scientific community in and around Canada. And we're basically getting some lessons from him as getting to know his journey and also trying to understand what the skills that he brings and how he is or he tends to be successful in his own professional career life. And we will also ask him questions about how his childhood and his interests have led him to become what he is right now. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, Yuji. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is interesting. My first time recording a podcast ever, actually.
Yeah, well, this is directly from a phone using this Anchor app. And it's pretty simple, especially right now because we're stuck inside and we have to stay inside. And so, this is an easy way to do it.
Yeah, this is interesting. So, my understanding is that you wanted to talk a bit about careers, work. Is that our plan today?
Yeah, that's exactly the plan. So what I've been doing in this series, I have had two before you, so you will be the third person. And basically, we're calling it professional journeys, professional stories of individuals. So we're basically focusing on the career direction an individual might have taken, how it relates to their personality, their past, and what skills they have that leads them to be successful or basically that could be leveraged by someone else, and maybe it could be sort of like a frame of reference when they want to grow themselves in a similar career. So that's
Absolutely.
The purpose of this conversation.
Career path and storytelling. I love it.
Yeah. So I guess my first question is, what do you call yourself professionally speaking, and why? Why would you call yourself whatever that label is?
That's a very interesting question. So to answer your question, the short answer is scientist. And I would always want to call myself a scientist. And the reason behind that is, first of all, definitely my scientific training.
Okay.
I've had an inspiration to be a scientist since a very young age. I think that's kind of the intuition from my family. I was actually born into a very academic family. Pretty much everybody from my mother's side are teachers, mostly in STEM field, and my dad's side they're all engineer. My dad's father and my grandfather was a chemical engineer. My dad's is a marine engineer, and my dad's only brother is a mechanical engineer by training. And my mom was a chemistry teacher before she retired. And it's very interesting because I think it's also kind of rare for a Chinese in my generation to be born to a very academic family. And the reason is that China, after the Communist Party took over, China had several political movements where a lot of intellectuals in the society either die or been put into jail or face political pressures and couldn't speak out again. And for some reason, somehow, my family survived many political movements along the way. And actually, my parents had a very remarkable career, both of them. So I would say it was intuition for me to pursue science, to pursue scientific degree when I was seeking out for education, for further education, post-secondary education. When I got out of high school, and I was looking around I was at the time very interested in chemistry and biology.
Okay.
Partly because my mom was a chemistry teacher, and now I have a master's in chemistry, actually in the acknowledgement of my master thesis. I mentioned the reason that I choose chemistry was that ammonium fountain experiment my mom performed when I was 6 years old. I sort of grew up in a chemistry laboratory, a teaching laboratory, where
Wow.
my mom was teaching. Because, well, I
So
kind of want to
impressive.
mention this a little bit about women in workplace,
Sure.
because it's very interesting that I saw my mom as a very professional woman, a chemistry teacher for 30 something years, and the last decade of her career, she was the principal of the high school. So she was in the administration as well. And she was constantly juggling different things, including, raising me and
Yeah.
along with all other professional things, careers, including teaching. And she constantly brought me into chemistry laboratory. And when I was, I think, around 7 or 8, when my mom was doing
That's amazing.
lab prep, there was an accident where my mom just accidentally sprayed on uh, hydrogen chloride to my face, actually.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and it was very diluted, but still,
Yeah.
that was an accident, and my mom was
Yeah.
scared.
Hmm.
But that kind of, I would say that kind of experience really showered me into the world of chemistry. Let me put it that way. So I was very interested in chemistry overall, and I was looking at what chemistry could do. And the most fascinating thing that attracted me was drug discovery. Chemistry
Okay.
can make drugs. That's the most simple answer I had at the
Yeah.
time. So I thought, let's do chemistry. And so I came to Canada 8 years ago in 2012. I actually got into McGill. I was there for one semester in Montreal. And I realized when you're new to a country, new to a city, it's a big city, you're kind of miserable. You're sitting in a big class with a lot of other people, and I didn't really feel that I was learning as much science, really.
Right.
I think there was a big culture shock. Of course, I moved to
Sure.
Canada. That was my first year in Canada, and that was a very large city. So I was kind of just looking around, and I discovered the Canadian East Coast, Atlantic Canada, and I ended up traveling here, touring universities around here, and I realized scientific research here in the East Coast are very niched. On a lot of professors here had small labs where they
Okay.
primarily recruit undergraduate students to do research, so you would have opportunity on to touch high level scientific research
Okay.
with some very brilliant minds here. That was one of the reasons that I moved to the East Coast. Did
Mm.
my undergrad in Mount Allison University in New Brunswick, and my master's here at St. Mary's in Halifax. And
Right.
um, I'll talk a little bit about my journey in the scientific training.
That would be
So
awesome. Yeah.
I I got into scientific research very early in my education. I had an opportunity to do drug synthesis on with a tier one Canada research chair, literally in my first year
Wow.
at Mount Allison University. That was awesome. And he was just a very n- awesome guy, great mentor to me. And I still remember his words. It's not important what you do now. It might not eventually get published. It might not eventually be a drug on the market. But the most important thing is, first of all, be safe in a chemistry lab, because this professor had experienced an accident many years ago. He lost one eye.
Well,
So the number one thing he reminds his research student, was to protect yourself, be safe, and this rule of thumb number two was to have fun. And
yeah.
that's the most important part
Exactly.
in science. You have to enjoy it before you make out anything useful. And I found it funny many years later when I discover a famous quote by Richard Feynman, my favorite scientist. On the reason we do science is not because um, something useful may come out, but it's because we enjoy it, just like
Right.
sex.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
um, and so that was kind of my starting point in the
Mhm.
scientific journey. I did some chemistry synthesis. It may or may not be pushed to the market as cancer drugs eventually, and I found that was both interesting and miserable. You're in a chemistry lab, you're making some sort of compound, and it will eventually be white compound, solid, and you characterize it. It was not, it was cool, but it was not something that I really enjoy. I really enjoy figuring things out instead of
Right.
just creating something that's kind of miserable. So I switched the lab, and I had an opportunity to work with another great mentor who at the time had a company called Cam Green Innovation. I worked for his startup company for 2 years, part time and full time. And I actually had an opportunity to touch a variety of projects. It was very project based. And I was involved in co designing the newest generation of nuclear reactor for Canada, Gen 4 reactor. I was involved in um, doing mathematical modeling for ionic effect. And then I got interested in nuclear chemistry and radiation chemistry. And I actually authored a research proposal on which got selected to do pitch with a venture capital in New Brunswick Innovation Foundation. It was a project.
Congratulations on all those.
Yeah, it was a project to make cancer radiation treatment adjuvant drugs on, so you can use you could potentially use that compound in cancer radiation therapy, and the goal is
Yeah.
to protect healthy cells or to amplify the radiation at the tumor site.
Right.
We
Okay, I
didn't
understand
quite
that.
know we didn't quite know what the compound would behave under the radiation environment. So that was the idea. We want to study this using a variety of methods. And was actually I actually made it to top 5 pitch in New Brunswick and got private money, venture capital investment to do this project on. And I went to Triumph National Laboratory for Nuclear Physics in Vancouver. That was in 2016 on as a
Wow.
senior undergraduate student on, and
Exactly.
I still have a valid Triumph basic nuclear safety certificate. That license is valid until next year, actually. On so I think I'm fortunate that I was able to work with some brilliant minds. On the first mentor was a very academic guy who just told me to have fun, and the second
Yeah.
guy was very much a applied science guy who really wanted to commercialize project on, and he's a very practical person. I sort of
Right.
worked with people on two spectrums in science on, and that was both very interesting and was so a great learning opportunity for me. I found, because when I was doing the nuclear physics project, I worked with
Right.
some staff scientists in nuclear chemistry, nuclear physics, and they told me, well, we do have a lot of chemistry and physics guys here on, but what we really need in science these days are guys who understand computers, who can use
Yeah.
computers to manage data, to operate on comprehensive experiment. And I thought that was a kind of a breaking point, a critical point for me.
Mhm.
I managed to got in contact on with a big name in computational chemistry. On
Okay.
so computational chemistry is actually a discipline that is on the interface of computer science, physics, and chemistry, and it uses computer modeling and simulation to study chemistry compound and to predict things. I was looking at grad school options, and very luckily, again, I think I've been very fortunate in my scientific training. I got in contact with this big name professor who has worked with Nobel Prize winners, a couple Nobel Prize winners,
Right.
probably more than a couple. He's a student of great Canadian chemist John Polanyi, who was the chemistry Nobel Prize in Chemistry winner in 1986. And he has collaborated with people like Jeremy Carl, who's a Nobel Prize winner in 1985, and Richard Bader, who got nominated for Nobel Prize in 2012 or 13, I believe. But he
Okay.
passed away, so he never got it. But anyway, I got to work with a big name when I was doing my master's, and he really used me as a PhD student instead of a master's student. I had
Wow.
several peer review
That's amazing.
publications with them, one of which actually went on to the cover of a peer review journal. Not many PhD students would be lucky enough to get a paper on the cover of a journal, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
So I just based on those scientific training, I think I'm eligible to call myself a scientist. Both published and have worked on commercial projects. And I think really important lesson for me along my scientific training was always to find challenging problem for myself to solve. You really have to push boundary on for
Yeah.
yourself. Of course, in science, there's so many new things in scientific discoveries these days, and you really have to find a challenge for yourself. It may not be comfortable, but
Hmm.
if it's something that you're really passionate about. A great example was that,
Yeah.
like I mentioned, I come from a very laboratory-based science,
Right. Yeah.
both nuclear physics lab and chemical synthesis lab. I was a very hands-on person with a variety of licenses and certificates, and all of a sudden, I was thrown into grad school to do 100% computational stuff.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was facing computer 100%. There's no laboratory work at all. And I didn't, well, I knew a bit about coding in Python and all that. But, I was not a computer scientist by training. And I
Sure.
was literally just thrown into a project. Well, let's work on this. This is a big data mining. There's 63,000 data points in this file,
Yeah.
and let's do some interesting mining and on see if we can establish a biochemistry theory. Uh, and I ended up actually building a new software, co-developing a new software in Python. That was probably the one of the
Hmm.
most challenging things I've done, I would say, because I didn't quite had a lot of experience in developing software, in testing new software, in data mining on, and I really throw in a lot of hours to learn a lot of those nuance. So that's I think the biggest takeaway in my scientific journey, and I kind of regret it a little bit that I never, worked in the industry between schools, between undergrad and grad school. I may go on to do a PhD. I actually had an offer to
Yeah.
do my PhD in the States. I never took it. Um, it was a good idea because I don't want to live in the States right now
Yeah.
in the middle of a pandemic. But anyway,
Oh, so it was
um,
very recent.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So I would say the reason that I felt a little regretted was that I've had colleagues who had real industry working experience before getting into grad school, and I think that would be very helpful when you're managing stress in the
Right.
middle of the project. that would be helpful when you're reaching out to other people, when you're facing challenges. You're constantly solving problems when
Yeah.
you're working on a scientific project, and it is very challenging, and you have to find help. You have to have very good people skills to reach out for help, to seek
Right.
help from experts. And when you're facing adversaries, those people who had industry experience would be better prepared, to have more contact in the industry, to seek help, to have more on emotional intelligence to deal with stress.
Yeah.
That's something that I would really love to develop on.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I guess that's pretty much my answer
Yeah.
on why I'd like to call myself a scientist.
Right. So what are you up to these days right now? I mean, I know it's the pandemic time, but are you currently working? Are you working on a project? Are you working on a research project? What are you doing these days?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are two things that I'm working on primarily. I'll talk about the science side a little bit first.
Sure.
So currently, I'm consulting for a team at Fisheries and Oceans Canada,
Right.
as and in St. Mary's University in Halifax.
Okay.
They are solving a problem of a invasive snail problem in Nova Scotia.
Mm.
It's a invasive species from China. It's called Chinese mystery snail.
Okay.
It is a very common species in China, but very new to Canada and North America overall. China is my home country.
Mhm.
90% of literature about this species is written in Chinese. So it's kind of rare to find someone who is prepared with scientific background, not necessarily in invasive species, but basic, biology and chemistry,
Yeah.
who can also read Chinese, who have experience publishing paper, co-authoring paper, and publishing paper
Right.
on,
Yeah.
and it's fortunate that one of their team member knew me, so I just got invited first. Got invited to co-author the paper, and later we found out there's a lot of work, so I was hired to do some of the work, and now I'm co-authoring a review paper with them. I'm just a third author, but I'm putting a lot of work in translating a lot of data from Chinese to solve this problem. For example, what are the predators of this snail? Can we find similar predators here in Nova Scotia and to solve the problem?
Mhm.
Because for invasive species, a lot of times is that they don't have anything that can control them, so they just grow exponentially, and they can take all the resources of local species. So
Mhm.
that's the problem that we're trying to solve on. And
Very interesting.
yeah, that's so that took a bit of my time in the past 3-4 months or so, and the paper is in shape.
Mhm.
We are in a final stage of twisting and fine tuning some final details, and then we're going to submit it to the peer review process very soon.
Right.
And so that's a scientific project that I've
Mhm.
been working on recently. And then I have a business myself. I run a social enterprise called Scientists of the Maritimes.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Um,
Yeah.
we are a science communication company here in Atlantic Canada,
Mhm.
primarily based in Nova Scotia.
Right.
Excuse me, I'm just gonna get some water.
Yeah. No worries.
Mm, yeah. So, since I say we're enterprise, I'm going to talk about our business model first. And this has been a great learning opportunity for me to learn how to run a business as a scientist. And so we are similar to some of the marketing communication firms out there, but we face academic clients like universities and national laboratories like National Research Council. And we provide things like social media content, consulting, and uh, science communication workshop training and coaching for scientists. And I discovered this niche because of my experience working on scientific projects. I've interacted with so many scientists across different across the spectrum. There are government scientists, industry scientists, academics. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
And I found that um, scientists are usually not very good at interacting with people compared to interacting with things. They're very good at figuring things out, but they're not necessarily good at figuring people out. Let's put it that way. And like my friend Jeff Clement, who's a staff scientist for working at Fisheries and Ocean Canada. He has a PhD in marine ecology. He's a very outgoing guy. We connected at a conference in February this year and became pretty good friends. And he said scientists are usually introvert, and the reason that there's a huge scientific community on Twitter is because scientists are introvert and we like to sit at home and tweet instead of going out and do public speaking.
Okay, makes sense.
I think it's very important, first of all, to get scientists help to outreach to the general public, because we need informations to be told to the general public correctly. There's so much misinformation out there. So scientists need training on that, how to interact with the general public, how to interact with media. Because you might be, when we're doing this podcast talk, you might be interested in hearing some scientific details when I'm talking about it. But when scientists are getting interviews by, for example, CBC, journalists on the TV may not be interested in having a lengthy conversation about some details. And really in science, it's most of the time about accuracy and precision instead of having a really interesting conversation. And that can really turn people off. And I have a passion of teaching my peers how to do that public communication. And second of all, we can do it. We can do that communication for them as well, by helping them on social media, by helping them develop general science content, popular science content online. So that's what the second science communication business that I'm working on recently, and we just launched a science communication workshop in February this year, actually. And I was supposed to talk to a bunch of peers at National Research Council, but now we're not functioning. Nothing is functioning right now, so we have to postpone that.
Interesting. That's very cool, and it's actually true, because there are a lot of people who get turned off by sheer focus. There's a lot of tenacity there, but there's also a little too much of sort of like focus on accuracy and facts. So that actually does we forget those stories. So those people who are focused on accurate facts, they tend to forget the storytelling piece of it, and that tends to be something which could be a potential turn off. Because then the conversation never happens, the story behind it.
Exactly. And we want very engaging conversation. And by engaging, I mean, you really have to give people purpose. Have you saw on the video by Simon Sinek on the why, how, and what circle, the golden circle?
I have had watched a couple of videos from him, but I don't remember exactly particular piece that you're talking about?
Yeah, so that golden circle is about the way we communicate. Normally, when people communicate, when people introduce themselves to others, we introduce what we do, like you asked, who I am, what I do. I'm a scientist, and how I do it. I work on scientific projects. I collect data. I publish papers. And why I do it, not a lot of people communicate that. But a lot of great companies on this planet communicate things differently in a different order. They communicate why they do things, how they do it, and what they do in that order. For example, Apple is a great technology company. They don't tell people they build phones and computers when they're communicating messages. They say we believe in changing the way people interact. For example, we believe in innovation. We always innovate our product. That's how they do it. We happen to make great phones and computers. Would you like to buy it? That's a very appealing message, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I think everyone has to learn how to curate that message to tell stories in a very particular order so people will be interested.
So, I have a question, which is there are people who would be aspiring scientists, or people who are right now in high schools, or like people who are interested or they want to lean towards science. And so, like, just as an overview, like, and from your own experience, what are certain things or certain traits and skills that you think a person should look for them, look within themselves to be able to, like, either call themselves or at least pursue a direction, scientific research, and have that blend?
That's a great question. I got asked that question a lot by other people, by undergraduate students who are just starting their scientific training, for example. And my first answer is always keep your options open. You don't necessarily have to do scientific research. There are a lot of things that surrounding science. You can be, for example, a programmer that support software development in scientific innovation. You can be an engineer that's building instruments and equipment for science. Always keep your option open, and then seek things that you're really curious about. By that I mean, is there something that you would just do? We're trying to figure out without remembering anything like sleep or meal or food.
Right.
I've had that moment when I was doing software development for that data mining project I mentioned earlier. And I was like, okay, that was my moment. I really love this. And I also really love writing both academic papers, peer review publications, and also science communication piece. I really enjoy telling story by writing. Is there something that you really enjoy? And is there something that you really enjoy figuring out? Figuring out is that curiosity piece that drive you to solve problems. And I think that's very important for any scientific discovery. A lot of things are discovered on this planet by accident, just because people had a passion for it, or people just left a petri dish in the incubator accidentally for a few days, and they developed the penicillin. That was how penicillin was discovered, actually.
That's right.
And when they had penicillin, those scientists had to have that kind of curiosity to figure out what is this? Why are they occupying the entire petri dish and killing all other bacteria? What is this? They had that curiosity to figure things out.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Great perspective on that. What would you say? This is another question. that if someone is already aware, like you are aware what your direction is or what your interests are right now in this current time space reality, um, and then they want to know where they can go. So, like, someone is aware they have a scientific blend they want to do, for example, if they do want to do research or they want to be sort of like do some sort of computation programming in chemistry or in some other field, in drug discovery, for example. So, but like in our area, like in the area, in your field, what are this like certain companies, certain schools, certain organizations that one should look out for once they actually are aware that have this sort of like scientific blend? Like, how do they propel themselves from knowing that and that they have some sort of background in it to like taking themselves to the next level?
That's a very good question for a lot of general audience. I think a lot of scientists start their career by accident, by accidental opportunity. Let's put it
Right.
that way. For example, I didn't discover this field, computational chemistry, until I went to work at the National Nuclear Physics Lab, and people told me, well, we need computer people. So can you please do a computational degree and come back? And I was like, sure. Uh, um, yeah. I like to put things into perspective and put things into
Yeah.
interesting way. But really, on first of all, to talk to people on, and I know it can be tough when you don't have anyone around you that's working, for example, on this on in science at all. But try to reach out to people. I think most scientists are very engaging people, are very friendly people, and now we had
Okay.
tremendous opportunity with internet. You can literally reach out
Sure.
to any professors that's facing the general public. They usually have their email address, phone numbers, just listed online.
Mm-hmm.
Most universities have web page, and by
Right.
reaching out to these people, a lot of them, even Nobel Prize winners, I've interacted with several Nobel Prize winners. For example, my when I was working on my master thesis, I had to write an email to um, a Nobel Prize winner to get permission to reprint his work. So what did I
Wow.
do? I wrote him an email. I do not know me. I still haven't met him, but I just wrote an email and he got back to me. Yeah, feel free to use it. I think most scientists on all levels are very friendly people, very engaging people. Uh, it's
Amazing.
only your courage to reach out to others, and we live in an age where technology is very accessible, so use them.
Right.
On Yeah, try to talk to people and interact with on science related things. For example, NASA has a lot of general public engaging session. You can literally talk to astronauts on the International Space Station on
Right.
via a variety of platforms. You can ask them questions on Facebook. They host Facebook live sessions once in a while, and there are
Really.
a lot of opportunities like that. Definitely seek out those opportunities to engage with people and keep your open, engage with, interact with as many people as possible. And I think that way you can discover yourself.
So one thing that you kind of jumped over was your 8 years. You said you've been here in Canada for 8 years, right?
Hmm.
So when you moved universities, like you just casually said that you just moved because you thought there would be sort of like a more open opportunities here to be able to work with like interesting researchers. But like, was that the only reason? And also, other than that, like, was there any sort of like strategy involved behind it? Or you just like, okay, well, I think this is something. So like, how could someone
Well,
such risks or decision? So, because coming
yeah,
from like to going to Mount Allison are a difference when it comes to say ranking, right? Like that's what anyone else
absolutely.
would
Yep.
do. Yeah.
Yep. So definitely, I have a very short answer to it. Chase people. It's about on engaging relationship and about those leaders working in the field. It's not so much about institutions or on project. Chase people, chase those leaders in the field, interact with them, and see if they're good people, good mentors. And that's advice I always give to others when they're seeking grad school opportunity. Where should I look? How can I find a supervisor? Reach out to them, meet them if possible, and see if they could be your potential mentor. And by mentor, I mean, can they guide you, in a way that you break your boundary, that you push yourself forward, and chase good people as well. You really have to find balance with finding those leaders in your field, and having engaging leaders to mentor you. If you have a Nobel Prize winner that's guiding you, you might be very busy answering journalist calls and government calls. Versus if you're working in a lab that's just starting out, you might be facing a lot of adversaries in, for example, funding, instruments, people. So you really have to find that tune balance that works for you. Who do you want to work with? And that's why a lot of companies these days want to have site visit for their candidates when they're recruiting. It's not just a interview with the HR person. They want the candidate to interact with people who are actually working on the project, with staff scientists who are working with the instrument, working in the pharmaceutical plant, for example.
Right.
Yeah. Always find interesting people to work with.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because I was digging into Apple's history, and this is how they used to hire. They get the person. So Steve Jobs would interview the person, and then the team would approve of that person. So the person would walk into their office and spend a day with them. So that would be the criteria.
Oh, interesting. That's the first time I hear how Apple originally how they hire.
Yeah, initially that was their strategy. We're growing at a very fast rate. Yeah, that's how they used to do it.
That's a fantastic way recruiting people, I think, to get the entire team to vouch for the candidates.
Yeah, and the reasoning behind that was that the teammates wanted to see if this person is equally excited about the things that we're working on or not, or at least if the person is trying to make it better in some way, but is very engaged. If that wasn't the case, the team would say no.
Yeah, that's right. You reminds me of another video by Simon Sinek.
Okay.
He talked about how Navy SEAL recruits people. It's also about that trust candidate can build with other team member, because they're literally vouching their lives for them.
Exactly.
On a battlefield. And when they're recruiting people, they look at two things on two spectrums. One is the trust they can build with teammates, and the other is the performance. Of course, everybody wants high trust, high performance people.
Right.
They're just brilliant. But if you have a low trust but high performance person, that's a toxic person in the team.
Right.
That might be a person that's really pushing on the battlefield, but do not protect anyone else.
Right.
So when Navy SEAL is recruiting, they are always looking for that high performance, high trust, but they would prefer high trust, medium performance person over high performance, low trust people. And I think that's very important these days when you're working with others. You have to be aware of yourself. It's not about how smart you are. It's about how well you can engage with a team and bring everybody forward.
Awesome. So I guess, we're cutting close to the time that I had allotted for this, and I'm pretty sure you're a busy guy too. So would there be any parting thoughts that you would like to convey to our potential listeners, about being a scientist in the Canadian context? I know we talked about a lot of different things about engaging different sort of people, not hesitating to reach out, and then looking out for like your, signs that show forget about food, forget about sleep, and can still be just on this particular task, and that could be your thing. But is there any parting thoughts that, like, say someone who's coming out of school, looking for work, but also wants to make sure that they align themselves with some sort of their passions? So I don't know if anything that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the very advice I want to give is to engage with your community, and to talk to the general public. And there are two reasons behind it. One, like I mentioned before, you really need to communicate scientific work to the general public. We don't want misinformation. And we want the general public to hear scientists' story, to hear what scientists are actually working on, and to be interested in science. That's the first reason. And the second reason is to find people's need. I was at a public lecture a while ago on talking about scientists and engineers these days are always interested in solving problems, but not necessarily interested in creating values. And that was what a business guy. I think he was a former president of Amera, Nova Scotia Power, and
Right.
I found that was very interesting because what's the difference of between creating values and solving problems? Because I thought solving problem is already creating values, but that's not necessarily true because if you're
Right.
solving a problem that doesn't have any market value, people
Right.
don't like you to solve that problem. People don't need you to solve that problem. You're not creating that added value on the market. And I think one thing that Canadian science, Canadian innovation really need is that creating value piece. You have to create some sort of market value. We say innovation a lot. It's a buzzword, but
Yeah.
what is really innovation? I think my definition of innovation is on solving problems that people really want you to solve.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you really have to engage with your community. Where in the business world, we say you have to engage with your customer to find out what your customer needs, and then you solve the right problem.
No, that's perfect. That's beautiful. It is certainly helpful for someone who wants to pursue such a path of like solving problems. And so yeah, when you want to solve a problem, you want to solve a problem that will benefit a lot of people. I guess that's what creative. You gotta like mix two different concepts together to sort of like have some form of a worldly manner and
Yeah, that's right.
not just satisfy your own itch, but do satisfy your own itch, but also make sure it benefits a bunch of other people because that's what market value, like that's what the market wants, and you want to be
Yep.
employed, you want to employ a bunch of people in future. So it's like it keeps the cycle going.
Yep. It's always about the market's need, and you can even study yourself to see what in the future market needs.
Yeah.
If you study hard enough.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because you always see like find some traits in you that the market would need. It's not like all the ideas or you want to work on would not be like marketable, you know.
That's right. Well, anyway, that was a very interesting conversation. Thanks for asking me those questions. I think that was a great self-reflection session for myself as well.
I'm glad. Yeah, well, thanks for showing up and helping us with insight. And it's just basically for
Thank
all
you.
the people who would be interested in pursuing a similar path as you. This could be kind of like a guiding sort of like a guiding light for them if they want to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good and rest of the
Thank you.
days.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye.